Hey guys, my name is Albert Ellison III. I'm a screenwriter, producer, and award-winning director. I'm currently in production and on set of my first feature film, The Profession. Welcome to the first episode of my series on screenwriting. In this course, we will be going over everything I know about screenwriting. My goal is to help you break down the process of writing into the most fundamentals and then grow from there so that you can understand the heart of story and expedite your writing process because of it. Before we dive into anything else, in this episode we'll be first looking a peek back into history so that we can understand what story is in the first place, which will help us understand, in turn, what the heart of story is. Theme, character, and plot. You've probably heard those words thrown around because that's a textbook example of the fundamentals of a story. If you want to dig deeper, you might also find people suggesting setting, conflict, resolution, and point of view as viable inclusions to the list. If you take these elements described as the core of a story and begin filling in the blanks, you may end up in a bigger mess than you know, with less of a story than you expect. Things will be scattered, you'll have plenty of holes left to fill, you still may not know where to begin when you put pen to paper. I'd like to suggest there's one simple and streamlined place a story should stem from that sheds light on two questions at once. Where to start with writing a story, and what is a story? In this series on the fundamentals of writing a screenplay, I'm going to start with the groundwork so that you can understand these questions and the meaning of writing itself. To accompany this course, I've created a 10-chapter screenplay writing guide. These are outlines for each of the 10 first lessons in this course, so you can easily reference the most important points, but they are also worksheets so you can fill in the answers as I teach you. My hope is that this will help you retain the information so it may better reflect itself in your future work. At the end of this video, we'll be going through the first worksheet of the guide. I'm making this guide a free gift to you, so before we proceed, go to the description below and submit your email to find the free screenplay guide in your inbox. Before we can know where to start writing a story, let's first define what a story is in the first place. A story is an account of incidents or events. Stories are one of the most fundamental elements to humanity. Our actions create stories which others then remember. We communicate through stories. We record history through stories. Stories are how we learn. We learn which steps to take and which not to take based upon the accounts of those who come before us. Seeing as stories are intrinsic to humanity, it makes sense that it has become self-evident that the most effective way to communicate a feeling, a message, an idea is through story. Stories are metaphors for life. As Robert McKee puts it, story is metaphor for life, and life is lived in time. So what is a story? A story is an account of incidents or events which create a metaphor for life. So where should we start with making a story? What I will be establishing throughout this course is that the foundation of any story must start with a philosophical conflict. No metaphor for life will be created if there is no philosophical or moral idea that is being explored. The purpose of a story is to explore a philosophical or moral idea through a narrative and come to a conclusion for the audience to be affected by. Story is metaphor for life, and to be alive is to be in seemingly perpetual conflict. Robert McKee from Story. There are plenty of classic philosophical conflicts that movies take hold of, such as the fight between good and evil in, say, Star Wars. But philosophical conflicts can also be far more narrow and personal, and this is the route I would encourage you, as a writer, to go. Find a philosophy that you are passionate about, preferably something you struggle with, and that could be a great place to stem a story out of. The reason I said a philosophy you struggle with, preferably, is because that often leads to the most honest writing. Every side of your philosophical conflict needs to be written with equal respect so that the argument is genuine and interesting to the audience. Every argument needs a valid counter-argument, even if both you and the audience are prone to disagree with it. If you go into a philosophy with a predetermined bias, it will be hard to win the audience over. Avoiding this can be done by stripping down your ego as a writer and being very humble, but it is perhaps best to work from a place you live in currently a subject you actively wrestle with. As a practical example of this, the film I currently have in production, which I wrote with my brother, has a central philosophical conflict about the dynamic between pursuing ultimate truth no matter the cost, or being comforted by what you already understand and allowing yourself to be ignorant. This is a very specific philosophical conflict with two distinct sides, which paves the way for the events of the film. The majority of movies being released today have no strong philosophical conflict. I believe this is to be less of a problem of laziness or a lack of education as a problem with our culture. You can look at many great poets, even Aristotle himself, and find musings on the relation between the nature of art and society. From Louis Sullivan, an American architect of the 19th century, we find this quote: "Once you learn to look at architecture not merely as an art more or less well or more or less badly done, but as a social manifestation, the critical eye becomes clairvoyant." Louis Sullivan. Every great story that lasts in time is rooted in a deep philosophical conflict that comes to a conclusion which then resonates with the audience. Much like architecture or any other art form, when stripping art down to the meaning behind it, it will become easier to weigh the important pieces of narrative and construct your story properly. An essential element of this course I will be stressing is the responsibility of the artist. Craft meaningful stories worth consuming. So yes, there are many films which tell a series of events and incidents but are not rooted in any meaningful philosophical conflict. This is the grounds for an entertaining movie that won't stick with you or mean anything to you in the future beyond the momentary enjoyment of the experience. Let's look at some of the most common pitfalls that get writers to this place. What I see happen most often is someone comes up with a story based around a concept, a scene idea, a character, which then they try to fit an overall idea around. This is why starting with those 7 classic examples of core story elements can be dangerous, because you could approach them in the wrong order and get off on the wrong foot. Your story will soon become broad and unfocused, never truly hitting home to the audience. Every single decision in your story, from the characters, themes, locations, point of view, conflicts, resolutions, all must be stemming out of your philosophical conflict as to focus your story. The second-to-second actions which the film have takes place in order to inform the philosophical conflict, and vice versa. Philosophical conflict and the events and incidents of the story inform one another. Sometimes it helps to lay out a visual diagram of your philosophical conflict. So, if you're looking at a practical example like Star Wars, as we mentioned earlier, it's a very easy distinction between the light side and the dark side, a good versus evil conflict. So, if you're going to lay out all the elements of a story, it's easy to divide it like this. You can do it in a circle or in a straight line. Either way, there needs to be the two sides pretty evenly divided. So, over here, on the light side, if we start with the characters, you can have the pure incarnation of the light side being Luke. Opposite, you can have the incarnation of the dark side being Vader. And then from there, this is just the easy way to judge your characters, where they stand on the conflict, because what they believe is what defines your characters. So then you can have someone like Han Solo, who, he's a smuggler, he's a little bit of an outcast, so he's not going to be as far over in the light side as someone like Luke would be. But you can weight him towards the light side still, and then his character arc is him coming all the way over here. Likewise, I said locations, themes, everything. It all has to be grounded in this philosophical conflict. So, for instance, over here, you can have Endor being the home base of the good guys, while over here you could have the Death Star being the home base of the bad guys. And through this, the art design, the production values of all of those places, the way it's constructed, reflects the difference between the light and the dark side. The lush forests over here, the natural beauty, versus the harsh, cold, grim, metallic moon that's hovering in the night sky. In future videos, I'll let you look into some of my personal storyboards like this so that you can see how I do it in more thorough detail. but this will just give you a really simple idea of how you might do something like this. You can do it in a software like Final Draft 11, or you can also do it just on a corkboard with little, pin up 3x5 cards and things like that. I've done that before as well. I just think visual representations of these boards always helps me be reminded of where every single decision of the story has to stem out of. It's a lot easier for me to be able to visualize all of this, so if I'm creating a creature like an Ewok, and at first, if that's just an idea I had and it came up, that can get lost in the shuffle and create an unfocused story. But when I put it on this board and I force myself to link it to either the light side or the dark side, or somewhere in the gray zone in between, then all of a sudden the story can become a lot more focused and a lot more clear. When you're looking at every element of your story on a board like this, you realize how all the pieces have to fit together, and it just helps you pinpoint which pieces are outcasts and don't really fit and aren't benefiting your philosophical conflict in any meaningful way. Take all of these words like theme, character, plot, setting, conflict, resolution, and point of view and narrow them down to the word story. Your story means your philosophical conflict, where everything else stems out of. As the absolute foundation for a story, you work with two things: story and structure. Now that we've determined what story is, we'll look at structure next, which is the means by which to execute the story. In the description below the video, you can find a link to my free screenplay guide, which is an outline of the first 10 lessons in this course, and every fundamental element to screenwriting. These are worksheets you can fill out as we discuss the topic, so you might be able to retain the information better. It's my gift to you, so submit your email and you'll find the package in your inbox. Get your hands on the worksheet before we proceed into this recap. The oldest manuscripts humanity can find that pertain to story are by Aristotle. In his Poetics, he lays out story as something that has been discovered rather than defined, because story is an intrinsic part of the human experience. Stories are guides for life. As Robert McKee, a leader in the modern story studies, puts it in his book Story, story is metaphor for life. Philosophical conflict is the heart of story. The majority of writers miss this and instead focus on elements such as page count, hitting pinch points for viewer retention, creating strong genre pieces to appease producers, etc. Philosophical conflict is the most important of all, and all stories must stem from that. The difference between a philosophy book and a story is that while they can both teach you about life, stories test and argue their philosophies through the characters, bringing the point to a greater place of understanding and emotional effect for the audience. Simply put, story is the most impactful medium to express ideas. Every element of the human body relies on your heart. So too should every element of your story rely on and be informed by your philosophical conflict. Characters, their arcs, scenes, dialogue, structure, locations, plot points, and every other element of story must be created in order to further the exploration of your philosophical conflict. If an element of your story exists that does not directly pertain to your philosophical conflict, then it does not belong. Hey everyone, thank you for watching the first lesson in my screenwriting course. If this lesson was helpful to you or taught you anything, leave it a thumbs up, but if you thought it could have been better, leave it a thumbs down so that I know I can do better next time. I hope to see you on lesson 2 where we talk about structure.